Hello, Dominic from Human Resources here. In this video, we're going to talk about something managers have come to me about frequently, and that is, how do you deal with a problem employee? The laws in various countries are intended to ensure fair treatment for people, and that has caused some managers to think that they can't speak to their employees about performance or lateness, or some of the other issues that arise in any workplace. So, how do you know you've got a problem employee? We're going to have some examples first up, just to give an idea of the kinds of things that sometimes need to be dealt with. Once we've established that we have a problem employee, the next thing we're going to do is deal with it. Now, in order to negotiate the complexities of law in modern workplaces, and personalities and organisations, we need to have a structured process. And what we're going to need to do ultimately is meet with the person to talk about the problems. But before we do that, I'm going to talk to you about the preparation that we need in order for that meeting to go very well and for it to achieve the outcomes that are required. Let's first of all have a look at some examples of problem employees. I can give you one example of an employee, let's call him Bruce, who had been working in the organisation for 15 years and was highly respected. Unfortunately, he had a difficult personality. And by a difficult personality, we mean in this case, he'd be swearing under his breath and sometimes at people when he was provoked. He called people nicknames, which weren't always very kind. And a new employee came into the workplace and found all of this going on around them and was very concerned. In fact, so much so that they put in a complaint about bullying. So that's one example of something that can crop up. Another example would be another employee, let's call her Lauren, who usually works from 8:30 to 5 p.m. She works very efficiently and is very experienced and generally a good employee. However, since having twins, she's been working 9:30 to 4 p.m. and sometimes leaving even when the work is not actually completed. So that's the second example. Another example you might have come across yourself is the lazy employee, always passing the work on to colleagues. They take a phone call, they put them through to someone else rather than deal with it themselves. They miss deadlines and they've had complaints made about them before. So they are three examples of the kinds of things that we find in the workplace. Now we're going to talk about how we can actually deal with them. Now the first step in preparation is not to feel pressured. Although we sometimes feel when an issue arises we need to sort it out straight away, that can often make the issue more difficult to solve. Could even make it worse. So the first thing really is to take a big deep breath and think, okay, I know there's a process to go through and I know that I'm going to be able to get prepared for it. So you do have the time to get prepared. The first step in your preparation would be to check the person's job description. It could be that there is something in the job description which will allow you to say, this is the behaviour that I have been looking for, as opposed to the behaviour I have been getting. So that might be one way of starting the conversation when you need to meet with the person. So we get that job description and we make sure we understand what's in it. The second thing to do is to check your human resources or organisational policies. Now there may not be any, but in some organisations there are, even if it's just a standard one that someone's got on a shelf somewhere. Often there's something in there which we can use to say, well, here's the kind of behaviours that we would be looking for as a manager. So it gives us a starting point to look and see if there's an outline of what behaviours are expected, and that gives us an opportunity then to speak to the person about what it is that's different from what we are expecting as managers. So that's the first part of our preparation phase. Having checked the policies and procedures and the job description, our next step is to make sure we write down any examples that have been provided to us. Now, in the first example I gave you at the outset of this video, there was a formal complaint, so that would be a piece of evidence. You may also have witnessed something yourself, or you may have heard from a supervisor that there's something that needs to be dealt with. So these are the kinds of examples that you want to write down to make sure you know what are the things that you can show to the person when you speak to them that are evidence of the situation or evidence of behaviour or evidence of the issue that you want to address. Sometimes it's unavoidable to speak to other people in the workplace. However, this should be done with some caution because you don't want the person that you are going to speak to be approached by employees about this issue before you have a chance to actually speak to them. So just keep that in the back of your mind. The other thing that we want to be aware of is that sometimes managers who work with us have managed this person or observed something themselves. Sometimes the issue has cropped up with another employee. So it can be worthwhile speaking confidentially to your fellow managers, maybe just one or two that you get on well with, and check whether this issue has arisen before with any other employees and just see how that was handled, because an important thing in any organisation is to ensure consistency. So you don't want to be going in very hard on something which has been allowed to flourish before without getting support from others. Again, we need to make sure confidentiality is maintained. You can't be going around, creating allegations against the person before you've spoken to them. So it's a bit of a balancing act. You need to be a little bit careful about how much information you're gathering. But on the other hand, you need to have enough information to have the conversation in a meaningful way to show the employee what it is that needs to change. The other thing I would say is that we want to handle this professionally. So you're watching this video to find a way of handling this professionally yourself. And all good managers should be able to do that with the kind of day-to-day things and the kinds of examples that we had in the initial outset of the video. However, there are some situations which are more difficult and which might require some legal advice. So just be aware that may be the case. Sometimes employer associations or industry associations can be a good source of advice about how to proceed with something. However, we're going to go ahead now and just talk about how we can continue to manage this process ourselves and hopefully negotiate the difficulties of workplace relationships, organisational relationships, and the law about employment. Now, the next point we want to make is you need to check the person's file. This is important because if there's been any formal documentation of warnings or some sort of discussion before, it should be in the employee's file. So make sure you have a look and be aware of anything that's cropped up before, because that is a good way to speak to someone by saying, we know that there's been this issue and you've been spoken to about it. I've noticed that it's cropped up again. So these are the kinds of things that you need to have at your fingertips before you start to plan the meeting that you're going to have with the employee. So once this information gathering phase is kind of finished, the next step is actually to plan the meeting itself. And so we're going to cover that in the next section. Okay, so we've done the preparation, we've got our examples, we've checked the policies and job description, we've spoken to any advisors we need to speak to. Our next stage is to plan the meeting. We need to plan that meeting because we want to know what it is that we're going to say. What are the specific behaviours and items we're going to point to in the meeting. We also need to know what it is that needs to change. So how are we going to explain that to the person? So what is it that we are looking for them to do differently? So we have to be able to explain that to them. It may seem common sense, but sometimes it's not as easy to articulate that as you would expect. So what are we going to say to them? What are we going to say about what needs to change? We also need to think about what is it that they are going to feel themselves. So what's the reaction likely to be? Are they likely to be happy to have it pointed out to them and be happy to change? Or are they going to be angry? And what can we do to keep the level of confrontation very low in this meeting? So we're going to try and stick to the facts. We're not going to attack the person. We're going to talk about the behaviour. Those are the things that we want to think about in planning the meeting. How are we going to keep it calm? How are we going to make sure we get through the various issues? Also, what are we going to do if something crops up as an explanation which is not a disciplinary matter, but rather, say, for example, someone is not coming into work because they have cancer or some other terrible thing. So we have to divert the meeting away from a disciplinary meeting and into some sort of support meeting where we try and find out what it is that we can do to assist the person to continue with their work and also to receive whatever it is that they need to receive. So we need to be a little bit prepared about what happens if this meeting suddenly takes a different turn. If the meeting is going to take a different turn, we can always take a break and say, look, I'll check out the information you provided to me and I'll come back to you. We might talk about that in the next video, the actual conduct of the meeting. But for the moment, we just need to know what's the likely reaction, how are we going to respond to that, what is it that needs to change, how are we going to explain that, and also what sort of period of review we're going to go for. Is it something we're going to look at in a month? Is it something that's quite long term? Or is it something like turning up on time you might look at in a fortnight? So those are the kinds of things to think about. In the next section, we're going to have a look at how do we actually notify the person of the meeting, because that in itself is an important part of the process. In the final section of this video, we're going to talk about the notification. So usually you tell the person when the meeting is going to be, where it's going to be. You ensure that you've got somewhere that's fairly private, so this conversation can happen confidentially. And you usually give them about a week's notice, and you usually write to them so the person has some sort of formal notification that this is happening. And in that letter, you're going to put a summary of the issue. That's so the person is not kind of ambushed with this information, is actually coming, knowing what the meeting's about, and perhaps can prepare some sort of explanations if that's necessary. Of course, you're not going to write down every single bit of evidence in the letter. You're just going to give it an idea of what it is that's going to be discussed, because you want to be able to have that discussion with the person, partly to see their reactions and also so it's a dialogue rather than you send a letter, then they send a letter back. You want to have a conversation. You want to keep it personal. The other thing about giving the person some notice is you can advise them of their rights. So various laws have different requirements, but generally speaking, you usually offer the person the opportunity to bring someone to support them. That person might be a union representative. Sometimes people get very nervous and they want to bring a lawyer. It could be a friend. Generally speaking, it's better if it's not a workplace colleague, but you have to be a little bit flexible with these things sometimes. So you give them all of those pieces of information in writing, and you give them the strong impression that they have the opportunity to respond, because that is what you're after. You're after a conversation where you're just going to put out what you think are the issues, and you want to hear their response. So you don't want this letter to be kind of in an accusatory way. Rather, you want to say, we want to have a discussion about this issue, and we want to hear what your response to it. So the points that we've covered in this video are, first of all, do you have a problem? Secondly, don't be scared. There's a process. It involves preparation, it involves planning, and it involves notification of a meeting. In the next video, we will have a look at what you actually do when you're conducting a meeting of this type. For more information, you can also go to my blog, www.ethicos.com.au. Thanks very much for watching.